to share with you some of the things that we've learned over 20 years of building balanced scorecard systems for governments worldwide. I'll start. Hang on here. Let me see if I can get the mouse working and everything. I want to compare what we call a balanced strategy versus a traditional strategy through the eyes of a government agency, how they would treat this. And so what I'm going to share with you applies primarily to government, but turns out equally well to nonprofits and also quasi-government entities. The logic that I'll share is a little different than what the original Balanced Scorecard founders created. We had to make some changes because the value proposition for government and citizens is very different than the profit motive for private industry. So I'll share some of that with you. The easy part, it turns out, after having done around 250 of these worldwide, is that it's relatively easy and quick to build a balanced scorecard system. And I'll share an example or two with you about that. The hard part is how you execute the strategy that you've developed, executing good strategy well. That's a culture change for an organization. That's a changing hearts and minds. So when you see this presentation or here, think about the balanced scorecard as much more than performance measures. It really is a change management initiative for an organization. The work that we've done, the knowledge that we've gained has been heavily influenced by our work with the Association for Strategic Planning. We are registered education providers. We helped write the body of knowledge for the strategic planning profession. We're also registered education providers for the Project Management Institute. We're actually one of only 2 companies in the world with these 2 credentials. I'm Howard Rome. I've been doing this for a while. I spent about 25 years in federal service, in energy and intelligence and consulting. I've also worked in the private sector and worked in the nonprofit sector as well. Robert, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Good morning. I'm Robert McDonald. I'm the Business Development Director at the Balanced Scorecard Institute. Prior to that, I spent 22 years with Xerox, where I served recently as Worldwide Business Operations Manager. And outside of that, my career has had me working in key areas of corporate planning and strategy, business development and management, and international operations leadership.
Thank you, Robert. So what are some issues driving government performance now? Again, I'm going to talk about the balanced scorecard in the context of performance management, helping to create a higher performance organization. I'll touch on measures, but as you will see, the balanced scorecard over the last 25 years since it was originally developed at Harvard has changed a lot and become much more than just a performance measurement tool. So we'll talk about disruptions to strategy and operations, especially in the short term, right? Many organizations that we are dealing with are essentially rethinking the scenarios under which they run their agencies, run their counties, run their cities, and looking for ways to redo the budget process, right? To be more responsive to less revenue coming in from taxes and other income sources. So it's been a real disruption. And one of the things we found that organizations that have a tool or a framework for helping to understand what the disruptions mean can have much more informed conversations about what to do about it. Budgets are stressed, requiring reprioritization of initiatives and programs and services. There are revisions to goals and measures and targets. And as we're discovering, there's new ways of working with folks spending much more time working remotely. And the customer needs are changing also, whether they're citizens or the warfighter or regulatory folks. The value proposition for customers is changing. We've also seen examples of that. So with this kind of a climate, what are we going to do differently? There's a lot of different ways of doing performance management for government. I will share with you over the 40 plus years I've been doing this, I've worked with probably 35 or 40 different performance measurement management systems. Some of them are applicable to private sector. Most of them are. Some are applicable to public sector and not-for-profits. But most of the ones that we have been exposed to are primarily designed around private sector, shareholder value, right? Increase revenues, increase profitability. A lot of governments use what I call the gold bucket approach. And truth be told, I'll admit to doing this when I started my strategic planning career with the Atomic Energy Commission way back in the day. And we would look at the programs that we were currently working on. We would identify some gold buckets, and we would put all the programs that we had into one or more gold buckets. I'll call this the traditional strategic planning process. We've seen it all over the world. We've worked in 40 countries now, and with folks from over 80 countries in our training programs. And there's commonality across a lot of the ministries and the government agencies that we have worked with, where we write vision and mission statements. We spend a lot of time trying to get those crisp. We identify a set of core values. We identify a set of goal buckets. We choose projects and programs, and then we set out some performance measures. These are usually the easy to count ones, the inputs and the outputs, and then we run the projects and the programs that make up our organization. What we found is that there's usually a rush to judgment to just get to the projects and programs, which are where people live, right, and the performance measures. It's like measures are an end, right? I just got to get my measures. My boss wants performance measures. So in a lot of organizations, we've seen performance measurement is treated like it's the end of this process. I mean, the reality is that it's a means to an end. And the end is what we're trying to accomplish, right? Why are we in business, so to speak, in the agency that we represent? It's to serve citizens or for some other purpose. So what does a balanced scorecard do that traditional strategic planning and some of those other approaches that I showed earlier do? Well, for one thing, we have a consistent use of language. I've been in many organizations where I'm talking to somebody at the head of the organization, and he or she is talking about goals, goals, goals. And I've literally gone across the hall to one of the departments, and somebody started talking about objectives, objectives, objectives. And it literally took me 15 minutes to realize that they were both talking about the same thing. I can tell you that if my goal is your objective and we're just starting to talk, we're going to have a problem communicating. So one of the things that the Balanced Scorecard does is it makes consistent use of language. One of the truisms in the strategic planning and management profession is that there is not universal truth when it comes to what words mean. It's quite easy for you and I to use goal and objective interchangeably, right? And we both mean the same thing. We see it with initiatives and projects and measures and targets. Everybody just sort of talks in generalities. And one of the things the Balanced Scorecard does is clean that up. Words matter in performance management, and if you get that right, you're off to a good start. That's actually one of the first steps we do, is get people to agree on what we mean by words. The other thing the Balanced Scorecard does, it's a very powerful tool for communicating with clarity, communicating an organization's strategy. The other big advantage is that when you align an organization around strategy, which is really at the heart of a Balanced Scorecard management system, folks start seeing where they fit in better and how what they do makes a difference to the overall quality and quantity of what the organization produces. It's a very powerful communications tool, it turns out. employees fitting in and what they do, how they contribute, an important part of this. It's also an integrated system. The Balanced Scorecard started out as a performance measurement system with emphasis on identifying the intangibles that drive successful results. The original Balanced Scorecard was strictly designed for private industry. Matter of fact, the original work at Harvard was a grant to 14 U.S. Companies to actually find a way to better incorporate future thinking into planning and put less focus on short-term financial results. That was the original intent of the work at Harvard. So the Balanced Scorecard today, the 21st century version of a Balanced Scorecard, is an integrated system. It's a holistic strategic planning and management and performance measurement system. It aligns people, processes, technology, and work. It's really a very good way of aligning an organization around strategy, and it'll help you become more strategy focused. It'll also help you develop fewer performance measures. Our experience with over 250 organizations is that most of them measure the easy stuff. You know, the measurement process is let's all meet in a room and ask ourselves what we should measure. That doesn't work very well. As a matter of fact, the way we do it is to start with the end in mind. Stephen Covey really was right. Principle number 2, leadership principle number 2, start with the end in mind. So we always start with what we're trying to accomplish as the first question, and then ask the second question, how will we know success when we see it? So it's a different way of looking at things. In 21st century Balanced Scorecard land, we will use 3 phases to indicate the different phases in a performance management system. A strategic planning phase, that's where we tell a story about our strategy, the path and the plan that we're on as an agency or a ministry. And we'll talk about alignment. How do we engage employees at all levels in the organization and get them to think about strategy, not just operations. Finally, strategy execution is the implementing step. How do we keep the trains running on time after we have developed our strategy? You know, I show these as the 3 linked chains because we want to make the point that you can treat each one of these as a separate phase and build the components for that phase. But the reality, of course, is this is dynamic and these things are happening in parallel. You're executing whatever strategy you have at the same time you're doing a strategic planning refresh, for example. These phases are driven by what we call strategic thinking. It's a process of discovery. And this is where we ask, hard questions of ourselves, right? What business are we in? What's the environment within which we have to operate? The regulations, the rules, the policies, and the procedures. What are some different scenarios for satisfying customer needs, satisfying citizen needs, for example? What's the risk of what we're doing? What are risk mitigators? And most importantly, what are the customer or the citizen stakeholder needs, right? What do they need that we're in business of providing services to meet those needs? So this is the way we have organized the way we think of balanced scorecards in the 21st century. I like to use the analogy of building a custom house. And when you think of a balanced strategy, which is one of the deliverables of a balanced scorecard system, you think about mission and vision and customer needs and the value proposition in the roof at the top at high altitude. Strategy has altitude. These are the high altitude elements of strategy. The lintel underneath the roof are strategic results. What are we trying to accomplish? The perspectives are the floors of the house, and the load-bearing walls of the house are those pillars. Those are strategic themes. Those are the basic high-level strategies of the organization and its associated results. Typically, there's 3 or 4. For those of you who have been in government a long time, you know that a lot of government programs and agencies end up with 6 or 8 or 10 goal buckets to put all the programs that they're working on into, so they have a home. And of course, if you have a program that you just absolutely have to do and you don't have a goal bucket for it, how do we solve that problem? The way I did a long time ago was just create another goal bucket. The balanced scorecard forces you to do it differently. It asks much harder questions to try and get your programs more cost effective, to try and find better ways of doing the programming that is necessary to satisfy citizen needs. So in the case of the Balanced Scorecard, we'll look at those four perspectives. That's the big add that the Balanced Scorecard brought to strategic planning and management 25 years ago. It identified different lenses that you could look at strategy through. It's a very powerful way of breaking strategy into components to make it actionable for folks throughout an organization. Our house is on a foundation of engaged leadership, interactive communication, and a set of strong core values. Emphasis there is on engaged leadership. These are leaders who walk the talk, right? Who actually stay engaged in the process and own the strategy and articulate it and communicate it effectively throughout the organization. Interactive communications is not a PowerPoint presentation. It's not an email to all staff. It's not even an all hands meeting unless there's dialogue. Interactive communications mean people talking to each other and learning from the experiences and sharing. So that's the way we look at the Balanced Scorecard today. The original version looked like this. Those four perspectives were called financial, customer, internal process, learning, and growth. And so the lenses at the top, it's through the financial profitability, shareholder value lens, financial. The customer lens was satisfying customers, retaining customers. The business process lens was making processes more efficient, right? So that we had a better throughput, better timeliness, better quality, and so on. And for learning and growth, it was primarily knowledge, skills, and abilities of employees, and technology, capacity, and climate, the culture of the organization. The logic of the Balanced Scorecard is that if we can make improvements in the learning and growth perspective, the things that we do there, we'll be able to improve efficiency in the internal process perspective. If we're successful with that, we'll better satisfy customers who will recommend us to others, resulting in increased revenue and financial profitability and shareholder value. That's the basic premise at the heart of the Balanced Scorecard logic 25 years ago. In the public sector logic, it doesn't work because of the value proposition, right? The customers are really citizens, and they have a different value proposition than the owner of a company. The internal process is similar, learning and growth, has some commonality to the private sector model. A lot of folks that we have run into, a lot of consultants, internationally and domestically, have solved or supposedly solved the problem of creating a government version of the Balanced Scorecard by putting financial at the bottom, essentially moving financial at the bottom. The problem with that is that the logic that you're essentially presenting to a Office of Management and Budget Reviewer, or whatever the equivalent is in your county or state or federal agency internationally, is that you're essentially saying, give me more money and I'll do more good work. So it doesn't really, it doesn't hold up very well if you have financial at the bottom of the perspective list, because it's really hard to make a cost effectiveness case at the bottom of a Balanced Scorecard. The way we have fixed that is to keep organization capacity or learning and growth at the bottom, and expand its use to include not just human capital, but also infrastructure and culture and the capabilities of the organization and resource adequacy, so that it's not the bigger budgets, it's adequate resources for the mission that you have been given. Internal process is very similar. Financial stewardship then, in the second position from the top, becomes a stewardship lens, a fiduciary lens. We're essentially using other people's money, taxes, for the common good. So that's about cost effectiveness, right? Am I getting a lot of value for the money that I'm spending? So that's what the financial perspective needs to be in a public sector. And it's the same for nonprofits. Exactly the same logic holds for a nonprofit. You have member fees that you're using. You got to show effective programming to continue to grow your association, for example. And the top lens is really about satisfaction. But instead of customers, we would use citizens and other stakeholders who are the beneficiaries of this value chain. The Balanced Scorecard is a value creation chain. And the logic that we use is that if we can do a good job in organization capacity, it will lead to improved processes and efficiency, which will lead to improved stewardship, more cost effectiveness, which will lead to satisfied citizens and stakeholders. So that's the logic that the Balanced Scorecard brings to the table. There have been other changes since the original Balanced Scorecard. I mentioned it's now a performance management system, not just a measurement framework. When we build these systems, we build them with transparency. This isn't something that you just turn over to the head of strategic planning or to the assistant secretary of the department and go in a corner or to a golf resort and build it. These work really well if you involve the people in the organization who are ultimately going to be responsible for producing results. So when we do this, we use facilitated workshops with the different voices in the room representing the different people in the organization to bring their expertise to the table, to bring their knowledge, to bring what they know and what they've learned from running their processes wherever they are in the organization. So it's a very powerful way of doing what? Of starting to build employee buy-in right from the first day, rather than treating a management system like it's some sort of a hood ornament and you're going to hand it off to the HR folks to implement after some other folks have developed it. That just doesn't work today. It didn't work very well 20 or 30 years ago. It works even less well today. So if you're serious about a balanced scorecard, be serious about how you organize the development of that balanced scorecard to incorporate transparency and inclusiveness and actually bake in change management. We adopted John Cotter's work at Harvard. And so in our framework, we built in change management into every one of the steps so that you're involving people and they are growing and learning as the development process goes on. As the framework connects the dots. Today, we can go from high altitude mission, vision, and value through strategy, through the initiatives that are the result of the strategy, right into the departments that are underneath the enterprise, and right down to the desktop to align the work that people do on a day-to-day basis with the mission and vision. Line of sight alignment. There's distinct steps for strategy development, creating objectives, and so on. All the components are discrete steps that connect into an integrated system. And there are different frameworks for the public sector, private sector, and nonprofit. We've even done some hybrids where a government entity, a quasi-government entity, has revenue generation responsibility as well as mission responsibility to satisfy citizen needs. So there's sort of variations on a theme here as we get into balanced scorecard development. The result is that we have an integrated management system, not just a measurement framework. One of my favorite stories was resulting in NASA, the work that NASA did landing a man on the moon back in the 60s. President Kennedy made a famous speech about the goal of putting a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And the story is told about a guy at what was then Cape Canaveral sweeping the floor. And when the program was announced, all the reporters, the press was all over the various installations that made up the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And so a reporter put a microphone in this guy's face and asked him what he was doing. And he thought for a minute and he said, asked him what his job was. And the guy thought for a minute and he said, my job is to help put the man on the moon. Folks, that's when you know you got alignment in the organization. When the guy who's sweeping the floor answers the "what am I doing" question with the goal of the whole organization. So today's Balanced Scorecard is built around a very simple premise: make strategy everybody's job. Stephen Covey really was right. The way you do that is start with the end in mind and work backwards, which is very different than most strategic planning processes that have been done historically, where you start with the programs and projects that you have and you try and build a defense for them. If you go through a process like this, you will ask hard questions of yourself and what you do and what your organization does and how effective it is in meeting its mission and vision requirements. So the logic works like this: vision and mission drive strategy. Strategy is a set of strategic themes and associated results. Strategy drives a set of strategic objectives, which are the actionable components of the strategy. And then the objectives are turned into a strategy map, which tells a value creation story to how you create value for your citizens, your customers. And then that in turn results in the programs, products, and services that are selected to be strategy focused, strategy compliant. Strategy has altitude, as I mentioned before. So the way we think about it is to start with citizen and stakeholder needs, identify a mission, that's our purpose, it's what we do. The vision is a picture of the future. Those perspectives are different views of our strategy. Strategic themes and results are those main focus areas. We call them the pillars of excellence that are going to drive key results. Strategic objectives and strategy maps then come at slightly lower altitude. Now we get to performance measures and targets, because now we have something to measure. We have a strategy, and we can identify a set of performance measures that are strategy related, not just the easy ones, which are operational. And then strategic initiatives are a set of projects and plans that actually will drive improved performance. So this is the set of things, the set of steps, if you will, that result in the formulation of a enterprise-wide or agency-wide strategy. The key to this whole process is getting strategic objectives correct. It's probably the heavy lifting area in this whole process. But if you get these right, everything else just falls into place. It's very logical, and the sequence you'll see here in just a minute. What it looks like when you have a scorecard today finished is something like this: mission, vision, and values, strategic themes and results, and the strategy map right over here. The themes and the results are the high-level strategy elements. That's our context. The objectives are continuous improvement activities that we have to implement for success. The strategy map, the ovals shown here in the different perspectives, are strategic objectives. We connect those together in a logical flow. KPIs then are used to track organization performance, and the initiatives are the projects that help reach the targets. The logic goes from the bottom to the top. This is not a systems diagram. It's not a process flow diagram. It really is an if-then logical connection among strategic objectives. Commentary is created for the objectives, so we know what the intent is and the scope. We also identify objective owners. This builds individual and collective accountability for results in an organization. How are we performing is the performance measurement question. And then what strategic projects must be implemented for us to be successful. So when you end up writing a balanced strategic plan, it essentially is a one-page story, a graphic of how things relate strategically to create value for your citizens. When we cascade and align an organization around strategy to departments and individuals, those are the objectives that go down to the department level and then down to individual personal objectives, which would show up in position descriptions. So the KPIs and strategic initiatives are derived or developed from the strategic objectives, right? For each objective, we'd write an intended result, and then for the intended or more, one or two, typically, sometimes three. For each result, we'd identify one or more key performance indicators or performance measures. Strategic initiatives then would be chosen to help close whatever performance gap exists between the baseline for the strategic objective today and what the target is for sometime in the future. The original Balanced Scorecard, as I mentioned, was all about performance measures, and it was done pretty crudely, right? Sitting around a room saying, what should we measure? Or, hey, we already have these measures, let's just use these. And that's how a lot of those original Balanced Scorecards were filled out. The difference between before the Balanced Scorecard and after was that the performance measures were just organized into those 4 swim lanes that we call the perspectives. And they were presented to management as a balanced scorecard. We go much deeper. A balanced scorecard in the 21st century goes much deeper into performance measurement. There's operational measures, which are the typical inputs and process and output measures that folks have been tracking for years. But what we're particularly interested in are the strategic measures, the impact measures, right? And for government and nonprofit, it's not just about the end outcomes, it's also about intermediate outcomes, because most of the time you're doing a balanced scorecard, you're not solving world hunger, you're making a contribution to it in your agency or your department. And that's an important add for government and not-for-profits. You have to put a fence around what you can control and what you can be held accountable for. And the discussion around intermediate outcomes helps. Project measures are also important because projects drive budget and resource considerations, drive schedule considerations, scope and risk are important. And the output of those projects influence both our operations, keeping the trains running on time, and also the results of keeping the trains running on time, the strategic outcomes. What we found is that it's harder work to do the strategic measures. You have to think more deeply about stuff. But the business intelligence, the value of that is much more valuable because it helps you in the next fiscal year budget formulation answer the question, how are we doing with our programming, right? The evaluation step around programs and services that actually has some performance information tied onto it to help inform budget decisions. For those of you who have been doing this for a while, you remember that the Government Performance and Results Act in the mid-1993, I think it was all about that, getting to more outcome and output measures and not just input and process measures. The whole design of the legislation was to make government more cost-effective in the delivery of services. This is something we did for the Healthy Base folks a couple of years ago. This was a President Obama initiative, and it was an important part of the program that was going on at the time. Actually, it was a Michelle Obama initiative. So just looking at the outcome, this is similar to that chart that I showed you earlier. The purpose, the vision, the goals. They use goals rather than strategic themes. No problem. We just redefine that term and make sure everybody knows that the goal is the way the language is going to be used and what the definition of it is. Goal results instead of intended results. Again, consistent use of language. So in this case, there are 3 main themes, not 10 goal buckets, right? Active living, healthy eating, and a tobacco-free environment. And then the strategic objectives in the strategy map tell a story of how we're going to get to improved performance, productivity, and readiness. The strategic objectives are linked together to show cause and effect relationships. And the perspectives you see have been renamed, right? Organization capacity, process, financial stewardship, and then the service members and families for the Healthy Base Initiative, the military Defense Department initiative. Measures and initiatives are tied to the objectives so that we have a logical connection between our purpose and our vision at the top and what we're actually going to track in the initiatives that we're going to undertake to make improvements in the way we are doing things now. Another benefit of the 21st century Balanced Scorecard is that it helps you find what I call chinks in the armor. This is another one of the military commands that we were working with. And so take a look at the mission here. Deliver fully qualified, ready servicemen and women for a total force solution while meeting essential needs for them and their families. And the vision, seamlessly integrate service excellence, be available anytime, anywhere. So they had three major themes, strategic themes. Be one team, right? Be prepared for today and tomorrow, and adopt best practices. And if you read the results, the strategic results, a single cohesive total force over here on the left, constantly ready force here, and efficiency, leveraging best practices. So when you do the logical test, the discovery process, you ask yourself, how do things fit together? And what you find is that none of the themes reference families. So the fact that we have families in our mission means it's important. But the fact that we don't have them listed in the strategic themes causes an immediate logic disconnect, which will probably drive the way programming and services are structured within those themes, right? I've lost families right at 25,000 feet. So it's going to be hard to pick them back in, put them back in as I go through lower and lower altitudes of discussions around programs, services, and operations. So big advantage of using a logical framework in the Balanced Scorecard. All right, we're almost at the end. One of the things that we have learned, I mentioned earlier that building a Balanced Scorecard system is the easy part. Executing on your strategy is the harder part. And again, there's a lot of different definitions for what words mean in our profession. But by strategy execution, we mean a systematic way of implementing strategy through the things that employees do and the processes they use to make sure they're aligned with an organization's mission and vision. So I have strategy on the left, strategic planning, strategy execution on the right. How do we bridge the gap? After working for the last 20 years with Balanced Scorecards and some 250 consulting engagements, we've trained over 8,000 delegates from 80 countries in this framework. We've learned a lot, and we've been able to group what we call strategy execution imperatives into 5 categories. We just gave a webinar on this yesterday. If you will go to our website in a couple of days, you'll be able to download the webinar on this. But basically, we've identified 5 imperatives. Engage leadership and governance is foundational. Project and portfolio management gets at the issue of aligning the projects that we're doing to strategy and eliminating projects taking on a life of their own, right? We want them to be strategy supporting. Performance information and analysis is a key imperative, right? The cadence of reporting, the way we do reviews of strategy, not just operations and projects. Another imperative is the alignment, to make sure that we get folks with the right skills in the right positions, processes that are efficient, and systems that talk to each other and work together. And then finally, operationalizing the enterprise-wide strategy by turning it into business unit and support unit operating plans, translate strategy into action, into operations. Those are the 5 imperatives. I could speak for half a day on probably each of those, but I just wanted to give you a preview of the importance that we put on strategy execution and change management in the Balanced Scorecard process. We use a 9-step framework to develop it. We've written a book about it, The Institute Way. It's been out for a while. It's now been translated into Arabic, Vietnamese, and we have taught the framework in addition to those languages, French, Portuguese, and Spanish. So just a little bit about us. I mentioned we've worked for a lot of folks and refined this approach over the years since I developed it in 1997. So we help organizations focus on strategy, on align their work, on prioritize and manage projects and services, and on measuring and improving performance.